And welcome everyone to episode 11 of the ASPEC podcast. So the ASPEC podcast is a series I've started myself. I'm Tai Wai, a PhD student, but also a content creator here on Twitch. And I'm interested in exploring the intersectionality of asexuality with other aspects of our identities. And I'm really interested in highlighting the diversity of experiences within, asexuality and aromanticism, because they're not a monolithic experience. And there's a real wide range of experiences that fall under the ace and aro umbrellas. And so this is what this podcast is all about. And today I am joined by Chris Hangry. Thank you so much for joining me. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, my name's Chris. Go by Chris Hangry on Twitch. I'm a cooking streamer. I make meal prep for my family, and I stream it every Monday morning, 10:30 Pacific. I've also been a chef I've been in the culinary industry for 11 years. So just like using everything I know to share just recipes, like different ways to cook with the community and stuff. And yeah, that's like pretty much all around all social media platforms. It's just pretty much about food.
Absolutely. And you obviously, you fall under the ACE umbrella as well.
Yeah. So I identify as pan arrow ace,
Yeah,
so don't I don't experience a lot of attraction, but when I do, it doesn't discriminate with gender. It just kind of like if I like you, I like you, you know.
absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, what are your pronouns again for the chat?
My pronouns are he, they, so I'm gender flux, so kind of just like sometimes mostly masculine, male presenting, but sometimes I kind of like I think go towards a like non-binary
Yeah,
area that I haven't really discovered very much of. Like
yeah,
still like a path that I'm trying to explore, you know?
absolutely. I only recently came to figure out my non-binary identity myself. I use they, them pronouns, and I just came to recently realize this as of this year. So that's very
Mm,
understandable.
nice.
So today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about compulsory sexuality and exploring the intersections of race, culture, and asexuality.
Hmm.
And so to motivate this discussion, I'd like to open with some quotes from Dan Savage in 2011 when he was interviewing David J., the founder of Avon, back in 2011. And so Dan Savage, while talking to David J., he's a little confused and says, when you date, the assumption for 99% of humanity is that you're out there dating and looking in part because, well, you want to mate, right? And he goes on to say, and if you aren't, you have an obligation to disclose that you aren't. If you're presenting as a carbon based life form, a vertebrae, because almost all humans are, you have an obligation to disclose that you aren't, or you are actually a jellyfish. And welcome on in, Caver. Good to see you, friend. So, this quote here, I think, very well highlights the problematic assumptions that society has around sex and around romance. Firstly, it assumes that everybody is looking for sex and a sexual relationship. The good old problem of allonormativity.
Mm-hmm.
And also within there is the assumption of amatonormativity, the assumption that everybody desires to date and wants to find a partnered romantic relationship. So our good old friends, allonormativity and amatonormativity, coming back yet again.
Mm-hmm.
And by extension, that, a third assumption we can basically say is that all romantic relationships in the view of society are also sexual in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so sadly, Dan Savage's response is very reflective of the negative opinion that society has on individuals who aren't looking for sexual relationships. And this brings us to the concept of compulsory sexuality. I love Kaber's response here. If only I could be free from social norms as a jellyfish. So
I
true.
mean, it's a vibe.
It really is a vibe. So, this very much comes from a Western perspective. But the, you know, typical Western perspective around sex can be summarized as follows. Sexually conservative women and femme perceived individuals are seen as repressed. Now, they're seen as aligned with this pre liberation era, either someone who is hyper religious or perhaps, the 1950s housewife, someone to be pitied. So if you don't want to be sexually active, you're seen as sexually repressed and you should be pitied for that.
Mm.
On the other hand, sexual liberation is seen as the savior. It's seen as now we have the ability to have as much sex as we want. Yay, we're free from the restrictions that society's put on us. However, as much sex as we want is not seen as no sex. It's
Yeah.
always seen
Mm-hmm.
as everybody desiring lots and
Yeah.
lots of sex.
It's always a good thing until you want none, and then
Yeah,
suddenly it's a problem again.
absolutely. So, through a lens of allonormativity, it cannot be appreciated that for some folks, as much sex as we want could very well be no sex. And asexuality, therefore, thank you to a number of misunderstandings, allonormativity, compulsory sexuality, is conflated with celibacy and sexual prudism. Through this lens, aces are always seen as being sex repulsed, maybe here, most likely prude, and celibate. Thus, in the eyes of, unfortunately, compulsory sexuality, is the only fix is to ensure that aces are sexually liberated. It's a really screwed up, messed up lens. But this is how society sees it. And we talked about this in episode 9 and episode 10. Media often portrays that a relationship is doomed if the folks within that relationship no longer desire sex. The relationship is doomed. It's problematic, all the wheels are off because the folks in that relationship are not wanting sex. And the only way to have a proper, healthy relationship is to have lots and lots of sex. And so the end of the movie, the folks in that relationship are like, yay, we're happy again. We're having lots of sex. I'm saying this sarcastically, but that is the way that media often portrays this.
Right,
And
right.
that, my friends, is the lens of compulsory sexuality. And Kaber mentions there's so many stories where the awkward virgin finds joy and liberation through having sex. Oh yes, the the virgin stories for sure. Which, like,
And like
yeehaw!
sorry.
Go ahead.
Um, I was gonna say, and like I definitely like bought into that narrative. You know, growing up, I
Yeah,
thought that's what I needed,
yeah.
and I did have sex. I got laid, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't that great. Like I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, and then like it wasn't yeehaw.
No,
I was just like, okay, this is like another thing. It didn't like there was no glitz and glamour, happy story tell kind of,
no.
it was yeah, it's and I understand that like media glamorizes a lot of things, right? And
Yeah,
that's why it's so dangerous, right? That's why it's so dangerous, especially for kids growing up to see messages like that where
absolutely.
you don't have a choice. Like it seems like you don't have a choice but to comply with like compulsory sexuality or like
Yeah,
romance.
exactly. The name right there, compulsory sexuality. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, as we've alluded to, it is also a huge part of capitalism, which,
Sex
sells us
sells.
all the things we absolutely need through the use of sex and sexualized imagery.
Hmm.
And the really dark side of compulsory sexuality is it is a tool to be used as a means of control. So
Hmm.
compulsory sexuality can be used by socially privileged groups to control those who are not in the socially privileged category, those not in control. So the
Hmm.
construct of compulsory sexuality often comes through the form of comp het or compulsory heterosexuality and is designed around the desires of the archetypal cis white heterosexual male. It is very much a tool of power and oppression to control when and how, because it's, comp het we're talking about here through a binary lens. It's how to control when and how women are allowed to have sex and with whom they are allowed to have sex.
Hmm.
By construction, this white cis het compulsory sexuality only sees white women as pure and proper. And then marginalized groups, on the other hand, are either hypersexualized or desexualized
Hmm.
as is seen fit in order to other or exclude marginalized groups. So, for
Hmm.
example, society desexualizes the disabled and geriatric adults. It hypersexualizes and fetishizes lesbian women to suggest they're not pure and proper. It hypersexualizes and desexualizes simultaneously, in many cases, certain racialized groups.
Hmm.
So, simultaneously hypersexualizing black women while simultaneously creating the construct of the southern black mammy who is submissive
Hmm.
and therefore controllable and is desexualized. And that's just absolutely all sorts of fucked up.
Um, Speaking on that, I wanted to touch on the media and just like societal portrayal of Asian Americans, just because it's
Mm-hmm.
like from personal experience, right?
Yeah.
Um, a lot of back in the 60s and 70s, Asian people just broadly were portrayed in such a way where Asian women were portrayed as submissive and you know exotic, right? Sexually submissive specifically, so they were like hyper sexualized in that way. But then in media, Asian men were often playing like the villain or like the sexless like guru kind of character. So like they were, the Asian men were desexualized, and I think part of that is also why I struggle with identifying as aro ace. I most of the time lean into being allo and straight, because like I feel like since then we've worked so hard, like Asian men, Asian women, like we've worked so hard to break that stereotype that Western media has portrayed onto us. And I feel like I'm doing us like as a race, as a not a race because like Asia isn't a race, but as like a racial group, like a subculture, kind of doing us a disservice by being like, I am asexual when we've tried to break that stereotype type for Asian men, you know? So it's kind of like a an internal struggle that I suffer with personally, but also like I can't lie to myself, you know?
Absolutely.
I know that I'm aro ace. Like I know that I don't experience attraction in the same way that like cis het allo people experience it.
Absolutely. And I can imagine, growing up, that if all you see is this desexualized Asian male in media, and that, the only ones that can be asexual are white folks, I can imagine that would have been even harder to, come to that realization, perhaps.
Mm. Um, there's a okay. There was a point I wanted to touch on this on that emasculated, sexless male archetype. I don't know if you guys watched the movie. What was the movie called? I should have wrote it down. Anyway, the movie had was starring Jet Li and Aaliyah, and there was a scene at the end of the. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna Google it real quick. Romeo Must Die. It's a movie that came out in 2000. But so there was a big like controversy over it because at the end of the movie, the the screenwriters, like the directors who were like on the Asian side, I guess, wanted them to kiss at the end because they're that was like aside from our conversation right now, but they wanted that to be the story, right? Like they were going to be the romantic interest, but because of like the stereotype that Asian men took on, like they actually took that out of the movie to actively like you know what would you call it, like actively go against letting the Asian man and actually like a black woman experience um romantic relationship on screen in 2000. Like what? Like I feel like I felt like we should have been way past that back in 2000, but again, like if you look, I mean if I look at it now, it was like 24 years ago, so I guess I'm very happy that we've come such a long way, but it was crazy because I feel like in 2000 I wasn't that young. I'm also like kind of old, so I think that just like proves like the whole um like the favoritism of um white
Mm-hmm.
relationships on screen. Like
Absolutely.
um
And kind of building on this a little bit, um, when we think of who is ace in media, in online spaces, and in IRL, in person ace spaces, mostly, I can say the ones that I've been in, they're white for the most part.
mm,
And if you think about who are the most well known ace advocates on YouTube, Ace Dad Advice, aka Cody Diagonal Orions, Lynn Saga, Fluently Ace Spec, David J. Bradley, they're all white. The only, um, non-white advocate I can think of that has any sort of degree of name recognition to the same degree as, say, Cody Diagal-Oriens and Lynn Saga is Yasmin Benoit. I don't know of too many other BIPOC ace activists with the same degree of name recognition.
Yeah, I definitely know like a couple. Obviously, like the author of Ace, what
Hmm.
asexuality reveals about
Absolutely.
desire, society, and the meaning of sex,
Definitely.
Angela Chen.
Yeah.
Um, and then um, I know of an Indian doctor, Dr. Pragati Singh.
Yeah.
She's like a huge advocate and like kind of like helped put together the group Asexuality Asia, and she's also the founder of a ace like related meetup, kind of like non-romantic, non-sexual meetup app called Platonicity. But again, like those her their names can be said and they can be recognized, but not nearly to the degree of like Yasmin Benoit or like the like A Stat Advice. They definitely I think there's space for BIPOC ace activists to come up. Um,
Absolutely.
and this that actually reminds me of something that Angela Chen said in the book the Ace book, because I'm literally like reading it as we're as we're like talking about this. I just like read a little bit of it last night. Um, what we need, I think, what we need is like someone to champion the cause, right? Someone in our group in our subculture to like like someone that's already famous to kind of like champion the cause so that it can be spread faster, right?
Hmm. Absolutely.
But again, like um, I think it's very difficult, especially for not just Asian Americans, but Asians in general, because of like the cultural implication of being ace. Because um, I'm gonna pull a quote from this article I sent you the other
Hmm.
day. But so in that article from the website Feminism in India is about asexuality in like I think online and offline spaces and stuff. But the quote is that the Indian subcontinent is a paradox of the highest order in that it is highly repressive when it comes to sex, but it is also deeply obsessed with all things sexual.
Hmm.
Any sexual activity outside of marriage is considered to be shameful, and at the same time, a disinclination towards sexual activity within the stipulated confines of societal norms is also considered deviant.
Hmm.
You know, and I resonate with that because that's not just in India. You know, like even in Korea, where which is where I was born and raised, there's like an implication that oh you should definitely wait till you're married to have sex, and if you have sex beforehand, like ooh, you're kind of a slut or like
Hmm.
but like if you don't ever have sex, then what's wrong with you? Like
Hmm.
like it's not just America, it's just not white culture. It's like all over the world,
Hmm.
especially because it's like as like a human society, we're like
Hmm.
coded to like reproduce, you know. We gotta mate, we gotta reproduce, we gotta continue the family bloodline. Like that's just like a very old world
Hmm.
um train of thought that it's kind of like outdated now, you know?
Goes back to
Like
what Dan Savage said, you have to disclose that you're actually a jellyfish if you don't want to date, if you don't want to have sex.
right? Like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Chris, I'm a jellyfish. But yeah,
So,
I I I would like to touch on like black and Latino culture as well, but I just don't
hmm.
have enough like perspective from that side to know because I know a lot of black and Latino aces,
Hmm.
and for being a social minority that's like hypersexualized, there's
Hmm.
a lot of aces in that group.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So like I want to understand um that side of the subculture of America, but I just don't have the perspective or the like
That's okay.
the knowledge.
That's okay. There's other people, I'm hoping to bring on who might be able to speak to that, in the
Mm,
future. But, definitely, I want to hear from, kind of your own perspective as well. Have you found
mm.
it difficult to find, ace representation that resonated with you, over the years?
Um, I think mostly I just connected with whatever representation I can take, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Obviously like the outdated representation of the sexless like Asian male is not a positive
No.
representation, but it is a kind of representation
Mm-hmm.
which I did like connect with. I don't know. It's like it's kind of weird because it's like it's kind of like ew. I don't want that, but it's kind of me. Like
Mm-hmm.
which
Absolutely.
you know um yeah. I guess I like to the specificity of like my experience. There has not been um a representation that like I could really connect with.
Yeah. When did you, find out about, Angela Chen's book then?
Pretty recently,
Yeah.
like within the last year. Like I'm reading it now, so it's like it's been
Yeah.
very recent.
Yeah, I don't think it's not all that old of a book. So you already, had
Mm-hmm.
kind of figured out your asexuality by the time, that book came out, I suspect, right?
Mm-hmm. I think I first read about it on like Tumblr in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So like I've always kind of thought like I've even had like relationships where I would kind of where they would be like, "Oh, how much do you love me?" Or like I would be like, "Oh, I love you like I love my family," and they would
Mm-hmm.
get upset because I guess that's not how romantic relationships
No,
work.
not to not to the
I,
average person society. No, that they see, the romantic sexual relationship as the pinnacle of all relationships, and it
yeah,
devalues any other relationship that is not that one true love, the romantic sexual partner that you want to spend the rest of your life with.
yeah, and I didn't know that. For me, it was like I love my family, and if my relationship with you goes up towards my relationship with my family, then like that's my pinnacle.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Absolutely.
romance and sex, like that for me, those are like just like social niceties, I guess. Like
Yeah.
I basically was I acted romantic to like to fulfill a social obligation,
Mm-hmm.
and again that's not how romantic relationships work. I didn't know
No.
that.
No. And
um
I can definitely relate to a degree in that I thought, because I was told from the time I was born that I was supposed to be in a relationship, that, the person that I, found a deep friendship with, I thought that was a relationship. And so I
mm,
got into what, at the time I thought was, you know, going to be a romantic relationship. And then I very quickly came to realize what they saw from this relationship versus what I saw from it were very different. And
mm,
it was not until after I was in this relationship that I was like, wait a minute. I don't think I ever experienced what society sees as romantic attraction. Because to me, I was just very happy at being, can we remain friends? And, when it
mm.
started moving into that territory of romance, I was like, I'm not so comfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, that's how I came to kind of put two and two together and say, wait a minute, I'm aromantic.
Mm-hmm. I wish I wish there was like I wish that term existed or was sorry was like publicly available
Mm-hmm.
back when I was like younger.
Same.
I think I definitely would have been like, oh, I must at least I must be at least like some sort of A spec, or like, oh, I should explore this label
Mm-hmm.
and see if it fits for me, because I think that's like a huge part too. Like we, especially before the online space
Yeah.
made it so available. Like no, we didn't have a choice. Like we
No.
didn't have the like it was not available to us to explore, right?
Absolutely. You know, having visible representation, having that terminology would have helped so many of us,
Mm-hmm.
especially, who came to figure it out later in life. For me, I didn't figure it out until I was close to 30
Mm-hmm.
because I had not come across the term until much later on. And it was only when I started talking to other folks that identified as asexual, I was like, wait a minute,
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to a lot of this. And then
Yeah,
I started,
oh, sorry. Go on.
I started to say, I think, I definitely fall somewhere under this umbrella. It took me a long time to figure out, kind of where I fit. I still kind of just relate to the gray sexuality, aegosexuality, but I know I'm somewhere under that ace umbrella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Um, what was I gonna say? Yeah, like I first found out about asexuality and like the term and like that whole thing back in 2011, but um, until about I want to say maybe 5 years ago, I wasn't openly out because like it kind of seemed like I was like, it's just like a Tumblr thing, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like like I know who I am, so I'm not gonna like bother, um, you know, being out to other people. Which is like, if you're comfortable, if that's the way we all want to live, that's fine, right? If we should all live as comfortable as we want. But I feel like there's like kind of as I started doing like streams, as I started becoming kind of more of a like a community leader online, like I kind of felt like the need to um I guess like very minorly champion the cause, right? Like I should be proud of who I am, and it should be I should represent this small group, 1% of the population, in what way I can with pride, you know? Um and then like as I was more out, as I became more comfortable with coming out, and I started noticing more and more like media, more and more literature that came out about asexuality. It was like it's really nice. It's really like, compared to back then, it's really nice that we live in a culture where we have ace and arrow like media, like literature, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's starting to become more diverse
Mm-hmm.
and more representative of the diversity that we're seeing. Mainstream media, maybe not so much. It's getting a little better, but
Yeah.
there's all sorts of, books that really delve into a lot of these issues. You got Angela Chen's Ace, Sharonda J. Brown's Refusing Compulsory Sexuality from, a black asexual lens. So you got all these diverse representations of asexuality coming out now, in the last several years. And it's really helpful to see that diversity.
Mm.
So one of the things that we've kind of talked about, this term compulsory sexuality, we talked about it very much from a comp het perspective, compulsory
Mm.
heterosexuality. But the fact is that compulsory sexuality also exists within queer spaces as well. So, first off, we briefly mentioned that compulsory heterosexuality hypersexualizes queer folks. And so, the lesbian women are hypersexualized.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to queer spaces, these themselves may be hypersexualized. And the implicit assumption within most queer spaces is that everyone still desires to be in a romantic and a sexual relationship. Not a heterosexual one, but still to be in a relationship that is, somehow romantic and somehow sexual.
Mm-hmm.
And moreover, asexual folks, may be gatekept by being told that they're, too straight passing. They fly under the radar because of the invisibility. They don't have that visible queer partner that,
Mm-hmm.
queer community is looking for you to be, haha, yes, you are queer because you've got this queer, visibly queer partnership. But not all
Right.
aces do. And, by not displaying a desire for sex, asexuals may not be seen as being queer enough because you don't desire sex. And sex is, by definition, part of the queer identity for most folks.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sexuality that drives the queerness. Asexuality obviously is a sexuality, but it's not in the same sense, it's not visibly queer like,
Right.
some of the other identities are. And welcome on in, Busby. Welcome on in, Ghost Hugs incoming. Good to see you both. How have
Um,
you found, queer spaces yourself to be within?
so I think it's very interesting that um people do that because that seems inherently like backwards. Like the word queer literally just means
Mm-hmm.
not like out of the norm, right? So it's
Yeah,
like if you don't experience sexuality, it's that is not normative. So that is queer. Like
absolutely.
it's hard to be like it's hard to
Exactly.
tell someone that you're not queer when your lifestyle is probably more queer, like more out of the
Absolutely.
norm, right? Um, in terms of like how I've experienced like queer spaces, um, I'm one of those people who are very straight passing,
Mm-hmm.
and so um when push comes to shove, I just play straight, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
which is like not a great move, but it's safe for me. And
That is valid.
and luckily my household is like the I think the queerest space I have because my sister and her wife are obviously gay, like and all of their friends are queer in one way or another, and so I get to hang out with them, and they provide like a safe space for me to be ace and for them, and they accept me as I am and don't um devalue or de
Discriminate.
yeah, or like invalidate my
Yeah.
identity, which is really nice. But I haven't been in enough like controversial spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I've not let myself be in enough controversial spaces to know how I could handle that. I don't
Yeah.
know, that just sounds like so much stress.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've fortunately, the organization I work at, is quite welcoming overall to, Aces and Arrows. We've got the Ace and Arrow group that I help run. So I've been
Mm,
fortunate in that regard. But even, going to Pride, it is so sexualized.
yeah.
They're pushing the condoms, they're pushing a lot of things about sex. And so if you're sex repulsed as an ace, that can be a very unwelcoming environment to be in.
Right. I feel like it's just I feel like that because like it's not like only aces are sex repulsed, you know? Like I feel like
No.
it damages the entire queer community,
Yeah.
you know? Because there's definitely like I mean hetero or homo like
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
any sexuality like people that are sex repulsed or sex favorable like it's
Yeah.
like several different
Yeah.
scales, right? Several different spectrums. So I don't know. I feel like it's counterintuitive to do that, but I don't know. Gatekeeping just sucks in general.
It
Gatekeeping is
does.
just stupid.
Compulsory sexuality in general is problematic, as
Hmm.
we've talked about.
Um, going back to kind of compulsory sexuality. I kind of wanted to talk about the so like aside from being from Korea, like and being Korean, like I'm also Filipino and Hawaiian, and there's like their own like cultural um stipulations to that, I guess. Like Hawaiian culture is Hawaiian and Filipino culture are surprisingly accepting of queer lifestyle that's like gay and not and gender non-conforming. However, they're again not very acceptive of asexuality, right? And I don't I don't know. The I guess that's that's kind of like the extent of it, but it just kind of sucks that even cultures that have some open mindedness to like um gender non-conforming lifestyle and like queer lifestyle also still have a long way to come in terms of like accepting where asexuality is placed in their culture, in our culture, you know.
Absolutely. And I'm just coming back to, a couple of the comments here in the chat and, ghost hugs incoming, talking about the fact that there's a lot, there's this idea that, aces aren't visibly queer and therefore we can't experience discrimination.
Mm,
Java or Jack, I think building on that says, there's so many parts of the community that willingly ignore ace and aerospec folks. And, this results in gatekeeping, unfortunately.
mm,
And, as you mentioned and Java for Jack mentioned, there's a lot of erasure from so many cultures as a result.
mm. It doesn't help that we're like such a small percentage of the
Yeah.
population, right?
Yeah. Duke said, Chris just made a very valid point. Because I once read a comment on a YouTube video in which an allosexual person said they're sex repulsed. So it's not only unique, that's a very good point, to
Mm,
ace folks. It tends to be portrayed in media that only aces can be sex repulsed. That's a very good point.
right. Oh, another point I wanted to make in conjunction to that is that like um it's like if you're repulsed, you must be ace or you must be clinically like problematic, like you must be
Mm-hmm.
traumatized or like
Mm-hmm.
and that is like super dangerous. Like
Absolutely.
I've
Medicalization.
yeah, I've recently had a conversation where I was just like talking to someone outside of the bar and he was just like talking about like getting with girls or whatever. And I was like, "Oh, I'm not really into that. I'm ace." And he was like, "Oh, so you're traumatized?" And I was like, "Step back." Like, first of all, we're strangers. You don't know me. And
Mm-hmm.
like how dare you? Why is that your first assumption?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The over medicalization of asexuality throughout history has been horribly
Mhm.
problematic. And unfortunately, For many people, it is still seen as a medical issue. I told
Yeah.
my doctor I was ace. Next thing I know, I have sexual dysfunction written in my medical history. That still happens today.
Yeah.
And, my mom, when I came out to her as ace, one of the first things she asked is, "Do you need to go on Viagra?" Basically, "Do
Oh
you
my
need
God,
help?"
that too.
Yeah.
The fucking sorry for cursing.
No, I curse all the time on here. It's perfectly
Okay,
okay.
awesome. The the male enhancement industry, right, is like super super toxic for
Mm-hmm.
aces. Like because like
Mm-hmm.
now even they're even trying to make like um gadgets and medications for women too to stave off asexuality like it is a disease. Like
It's fucked up.
yeah.
So fucked. Busby said the over sexualization of the queer community can be a interesting one to deal with. I feel like it contributes towards the pearl clutching purity culture. Um, when their kids get taught that queer people exist. Yeah, it's basically that the over sexualization is basically a way to say these guys this community is not valid. It's invalidation basically.
Mm,
But it doesn't just happen to the queer community. As we talked with compulsory sexuality, it happens to any racialized group that's not white as well.
mm,
And we talked about this before. So it's just a compulsory sexuality is fucked up for so many reasons.
right. It seems like I think um while everyone like suffers from it, like white or not,
Mm-hmm.
the definitely like marginalized groups and like
Yeah.
the minority like
Mm-hmm.
suffer way harder because there's like not just societal pressure, but there's like a physical like class system,
Mm-hmm.
based on um how the minority is perceived
Yeah.
in a,
Absolutely.
in a sexual way, and like there's literally um what was that, as an example, like let's say if you have like a lower middle class white family
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of kids, it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
they must be doing well. But if you have a lower middle class black family with a lot of kids, you're like, oh, they're living on welfare. Like
It's
there's so much like stipulation. And
that's that's
yeah,
blatant racism right there for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And like yeah, and it's like you have to navigate that as someone who is against the grain
Mm-hmm.
of that like compulsory sexuality culture, like
Mm-hmm.
who like you don't live under that expectation.
Yeah.
And yeah, on top of that, you actively are like the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I obviously being white don't have, lived experience to be able to talk about this, but I know that you've talked about the fact that, growing up, in Korea and, seeing, the desexualization of, Asian, males in particular, potentially, making it hard to figure out, am I ace or is this just how all, Asian males are?
mm. It's crazy because like media in Korea isn't like that, right? It's
Yeah, it's
Asian,
Western
it's
media. It's
yeah,
Western media.
Western media's depiction of Asians. And so it's like it was crazy to have like those two very opposing forms of me growing up
Mm-hmm.
on two very opposing forms of media,
Yeah.
where one was kind of just like we were depicted as the same way white people are depicted in the West,
Mm-hmm.
which is like Korean media and Korean
Mm-hmm.
culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also like Korean culture in and of itself is a little different. So like Korean media in and of itself is a little different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Korean media I think is very like feminine forward.
Yeah.
So it's not very like, men blah blah blah, like it's very like soft and romantic, and
Mm-hmm.
um a lot of it has to do with kind of like um um like looking good and acting good. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it does. Yeah.
So like a lot of it is like very, I want to say very vain,
Mm-hmm.
and very very like, and so like if you're like, and like so if you're like not like, um what am I trying to say, if you're not conventionally attractive, then it's like you probably won't have a good chance of even getting relationships. And that's like another layer that I was kind of like, maybe I'm not ace, maybe I'm just ugly, and I'm just like making an excuse. But as I like moved away from that idea, like, and moved to America and stuff, I realized like not everyone is like that vain, right? A lot of people uh enter relationships for reasons other than physical beauty.
Mm-hmm.
But um being exposed to Korean media, it was hard to accept that, because like Korean, I hate saying this because it sounds really like, um not racist, but like it just sounds like very like bitter, but like a lot of people in Korea are very shallow. So and it's because of the media,
Mm-hmm.
like obviously there are exceptions to the cause. And um yeah, I lost my train of thought. Um but yeah, just I think it's just interesting, like the different ways like media can influence like how you even see yourself, and like the fact that different media from different cultures can like kind of fuck you up based on like its own version of compulsory sexuality, you know?
Absolutely. Compulsory sexuality exists in Bollywood as well, for example. A
Mm,
lot of Bollywood is, there's a lot of sexual imagery in Bollywood as well. The dancing, the music is all very, very driven around sex. So, compulsory sexuality exists everywhere.
oh, and speaking of Bollywood and like India and like kind of Western Asian culture, like Western China, there's like arranged marriage culture, which is
Hmm.
like terrible even for allos. Like,
Absolutely. I don't obviously have experience with, arranged marriages. However, I remember reading in that article, the author talks about how difficult, arranged marriages understandably can be for
mm,
ace folks in particular, because they're expected, bam, they're arranged into a marriage, and they're expected, all right, what's next? Well, you're supposed to have kids and bring up a family now.
yeah,
What if you
yeah.
don't want that? You don't have a choice, unfortunately. I obviously, this is a little bit going beyond my wheelhouse because I don't have lived experience with that. So I do want to be a little bit careful speaking too much on that. But I'm sort of
Mm.
recalling what the author mentioned in the article. So if folks are interested, the article I will post in the chat is called "Aspec Identities in India Today: Visibilizing a Community Via Offline and Online Engagements." So I'll post that in the chat. It's a quick read, but I think it was quite it was quite insightful. I would highly recommend folks giving that a read.
I think again, like I also don't have a lot of experience in that field with like arranged marriage culture. like aside from just like a couple of friends I've had in college that were like, oh, like after college, I'm pretty much getting married to this girl that I've never met that my parents are going to get me married to. You know, like, um, but I think that's also why um the asexuality movement in India is bigger than the rest of Asia because they need that like active they need something to actively push against arranged
Mm-hmm.
marriage culture, you know? Like whereas like in Korea, Japan, like we're not like we're socially pressured to get married, but it's not you're not forced, you know?
Mm-hmm. I've also heard though from folks that I've spoken to, ace folks in India, that it's still very hidden and is not visibly out like it
Mm,
is here in Canada, for example, or the U.S.
mhm.
Because it's not accepted as widely.
Yeah. Again, like same as I said from the the quote from actually that it's from that article, you know. Anything outside of marriage is considered shameful, and then a disinclination towards
Yeah,
sexual activity within the stipulated confines of their societal norm is also deviant. Like
exactly. So therefore, it's you
you
are
have to be
in.
you have to be perfectly wanting sex and at the same time not wanting to be a sexual deviant. But
And
if you don't want sex,
unfortunately,
that's not
yeah,
okay.
that unfortunately being asexual and not wanting to be in a sexual relationship definitely breaks that, definitely breaks
I
that
can't
stereotype.
I can't imagine how to navigate that. Like
Yeah, I can't even imagine myself because I
that's
know
just it seems like a lose lose situation.
absolutely. And, it's very, with that in mind, it's very understandable why a lot of the ace folks I know who are, from India are very much not out because of the fact that their families just would not tolerate it. And so
Mm,
it unfortunately remains very hidden. I can also imagine it that being even harder to find, visible representation of asexuality in that, in that space as well, given that you have to hide so much under the surface to find it.
right. I mean, it's already difficult to do it in Western media where we're
Yeah,
more open about it.
exactly.
Mm,
And
now
where we
there's
have
more
ace
rules in
spaces.
Eastern media. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. It's as we said, it's Western culture where it's beginning to be more accepted. Media is beginning to include it more.
mm,
The ace spaces that we see here are generally white. So, there's at least some representation of asexuality here. But, going elsewhere, I can see it being even harder to find that visible representation to it's like, that would be, visible and like you, I guess. So
right.
this is a topic that I'm not super well versed on. This is something I'm still trying to, come to grips on myself. It's something I'd like to read more on and, kind of really delve into the issues of, you know, using compet as a tool of control. This is something
Mm,
I've, only recently started to think about after, reading Sharonda J. Brown's Refusing Compulsory Sexuality. We talked to, Angela Chen's Ace also talks about it, but it's not something I have a great deal of in-depth knowledge about. So this
mm,
may be, a little bit of a shorter podcast compared to some of the other podcasts that we've done. Um, we've talked about, how easy or difficult has it been for you to navigate queer spaces online and in person. We've talked about, the challenges of navigating, just, I guess, navigating compulsory sexuality within queer spaces. We've talked about, the compet and the desexualization, the hypersexualization of other, you know, racialized cultures. And we've talked about how ace spaces are very white, and that's basically what I was hoping to cover today in today's podcast. Is there anything else that you want to add on the topic of, the intersections of asexuality, race, culture, and compet?
Mm, I think we covered most of what I wanted to cover, like the erasure of asexuality in cultures. We covered was that asexuality in India?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Media portrayal.
Yeah, and we've covered it all, I think. So this might be a little bit of a shorter podcast today.
Hmm.
That's okay. You know, that's perfectly okay. So this might be a little bit of a shorter episode. Yeah, there's also, as Hugster Duke mentioned, in addition to cultural divides, there's very much a generational divide. Absolutely.
Oh yeah,
Like, I've talked about the fact that, that even for me as a millennial growing up, being born in 87, I did not see visible ace representation growing up that I can recall.
yeah,
I
yeah,
wasn't on Tumblr much. I didn't see the ace Tumblr that everybody talks about.
yeah.
So I didn't,
I mean,
yeah.
sorry,
So,
I'm only 1 year behind you. I was born in
yeah,
'88, so
yeah,
so when I was on Tumblr, it was like I was in college.
exactly. That's the thing is, we didn't really see the ace Tumblrs, the ace spaces until we were, into college already.
Hmm.
And in my case, I never really used Tumblr, so I never saw Ace Tumblr, and it wasn't until how did I come across it? Maybe I came across it vaguely through Tumblr. I know that really what got me into thinking about it was finding the Aces in STEM Discord and through talking through with people, some of the people I'm going to be chatting with on Sunday during Sunday's episode during the Fruity's Masquerade Rain Train. I really sort of explored my own asexuality once I got involved with Aces in STEM, chatted with some folks there, heard
Hmm.
about their experiences. And yeah, and that all happened, within the last 5 years for me. So
Nice.
I talk about this a lot, but for me, the floodgates opened and the queer realizations came fast and furious for me because I went from ace to being also arrow, and now, wait a minute, what's gender?
Yeah,
All within the
I
last 5 years.
I think like kind of the same happened to me. Like obviously, like I said, I've known the label of Ace and Arrow since 2011, but like I was kind of like actively like keeping the floodgates shut. And
Yeah,
then like about 5 years ago, I was like, okay, I'll be open, and it just all came out. And
yeah,
again, like just like you, like in the last couple years, I was like, maybe I'm not like in the gender binary, like.
mm-hmm, yeah,
So
exactly.
like definitely once you start discovering one part of yourself, like it's just like all of it comes, starts coming in.
Absolutely. And then, I'm not out to my grandparents because, as Hugster Duke said, like hell, I came out asexual to some of my family, but there's certain persons for whom I feel it doesn't make sense. Exact same for me. I'm not out to my grandparents because I don't think they appreciate or understand it. I keep getting asked by them, so when are you going to find a girlfriend? And I just tell
Yeah.
them, I'm too busy in school right now. And then it'll be, I'm too busy with work. I will never
I
be out to them.
I actually want to. say something that has to do with that, and also like the generational
Absolutely.
divide that Duke was talking about. Yeah, like for the same reason, I've come out to my mom like 50 times. And she's just one of those people that's like, oh, you just haven't found the right person, and that's like the worst, right?
It's so
Um,
invalidating.
but that's what it was. And my parents are like two generations older than me. Like I'm 35, but they're like 70. So like they didn't have me until they were about 30 or 40. So
Mm-hmm.
like they were a little late to having kids, which no problem to them. But they're also from like a very old world, Korea, uh, directly post Korean War, like
Mm-hmm.
so. That's my mom's side. Like she had to deal with growing up in a third world country that's like rapidly becoming a first world country due to Western influence.
Mm-hmm.
And her first thing was like, I got to get married and continue my blood.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad's Hawaiian Filipino, and when he was a kid, Hawaii was still under like sort of under American rule and not quite a state yet.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, he was like his parents were like um what do you call it, like having kids so that like they can feed, like they can have like a workforce, like their kids were
Mm-hmm.
their workers. So like my dad growing up was like, I need to have kids because I need to like have people work for me, like so it's like they had like very like two different reasons to have
Mm-hmm.
kids, but also like very ingrained into them. And I'm very like, I think I'm very like um very fortunate to have grown up in a situation that with privilege, that like I don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I was able to explore like my sexuality, and like being able to decide that I don't want kids, right? Being able to decide that I don't necessarily want a partner,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But yeah, it's just like I think it's um very telling, the impact of generational divides in other cultures, not just American, like
Absolutely.
how much it can impact like your lifestyle. Like some people might not even, no, some people might be ace, or like under the ace umbrella, and not will never learn it because
Mm-hmm.
like their life is so caught up with like their like familial responsibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's so true. Some of the things that my mom has said, I'm like, are you sure you're not Demi? Because some of the things my mom has told me very much speak to the Demi experience.
Mm,
Obviously, I can't assign her that label, but I think there's a lot of people from, my mom's generation and older that could very well be somewhere under the ACE umbrella and just not know it
mm-hmm.
because of the societal expectations that
Yeah,
you absolutely had to be, in a relationship. You had to have kids, that was expected of you. Uh, so yeah,
I
the
think.
intergenerational divide is also a really, important thing to think about on this topic for sure.
Yeah. And I think there's like that cultural, like there's sort of like a negative connotation towards being queer still,
Hmm.
like we're obviously like we're still
Absolutely.
working towards it. And even more so for like ace identities, and that like you can be demi and still be married and have kids. It's not like you become like completely sexless and
No.
undesirable. Like you're just the same person, and
Yeah.
like you're ace. Like it's not like it doesn't change
Yeah.
you.
Absolutely. And just because you are ace doesn't necessarily mean you won't have sex with a future partner, but it
Right,
definitely influences your relationship to sex for sure.
right. I mean, like I'm pretty sure you've talked about this
Yeah.
in the other podcasts before, but like the idea isn't to like limit, right? The idea
No.
is to like open up communication
Mm-hmm.
for like to communicate like where you're coming from in a
Yeah,
clear way, so that other people can understand it, so that you can express like your truth.
absolutely. And it's that is so important. I'll be talking about this a lot in Sunday's episode. The importance of communication in relationships, and
Mm,
I'm really excited to be chatting, around that on Sunday. But yeah, communication is super important, and if you are, in a relationship as an ace person, making sure that your partner understands, your, you know, how you feel about sex in that relationship. Whether or not,
right.
some ace folks may, may choose to have sex because, they want to, you know, form a bond with their partner. Other aces, sex is an no-go. All those are valid experiences. All those are ace experiences. But communication, as you said, is 100% absolutely critical.
Mm,
And yeah, it helps that we've got the idea of diversity. So sex favorability and sex, you know, tolerability are different things. So
right.
sex favorability is your is the basically how you think about sex in society as a whole. So if you're sex favorable, you are saying, as long as, people are consensually agreeing to it, I feel like, society should be able to have as much sex as they want. If you're sex negative, you are saying, no, I don't think, society should have sex. That's sex favorability. Sex, tolerability around, sex repulsion, sex indifference, sex favorable is sorry, sex, what is it? I always mix this up.
Oh yeah,
Sex
yeah. I
positivity,
think
yeah.
we've got it. It's sex
Yeah.
positive and negative for the
Yeah.
society.
Sex
Yeah,
positive and
favorable,
negativity. Sex
of course.
positive, sex favorability. Yeah, I mixed it up. Sex favorability is about you, sex positivity is about society. I mixed that up. I apologize. Yeah, I realized after the fact. Whoops. I make that mistake sometimes too because the terms are so often conflated in
Mm.
media too. So favorable is for yourself, absolutely.
It's hard. It's a lot of information, a lot of
Yeah,
terms.
it's a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology for sure. So I think, we've covered everything that I want to cover, and I think
Yeah,
um
I think I got pretty much everything I wanted to cover and a little more.
yeah, absolutely. We had a great chat. I know it's a little bit of a shorter podcast. Um but,
It'll be easier listening
yeah,
for
absolutely. Those
for the
listening
YouTube
back
people.
on the YouTube and the Spotify will be happy it's not a 2.5 hour podcast. Absolutely. I will link that video in the chat. Let me just grab it. Um, Here, I'll link the video about sex favorability versus sex positivity. Exactly. That's a good suggestion. At this point, I'd like to, give, say thank you to Chris Hangry, and I'll give you a moment to remind us where we can find you here on Twitch, where you can find us, where we can find you on the socials. Just to remind us, where we can find you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, shout
Absolutely.
out to Taiwan. um, you guys can find me on Twitch, uh, / Chris Hangry, Monday mornings, 10:30 Pacific for that cooking streams. On Instagram, you can find me on chris.hangry, or my not food related account is not dot so dot hangry. On Twitter, it's underscore Chris Hangry, and that's about it. I think that's
Awesome.
all of it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to go on a raid. The link I posted in the chat is the YouTube video about uh, the video talking about the difference between sex positivity versus sex favorability. Caver said, still a little hungry. Yeah, still want a little bit more discussion of ace and arrow stuff. You don't have to wait long. We will be chatting on Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern. So if you are up early, I will be live at 9 a.m. on Sunday as part of the Fruities Masquerade Rain Train with a special episode. So
Be
Sunday
here or
morning.
else.
Ghost Girl, welcome on in. Let me give you a shout out. Ghost Girl is the creator of the Fruities stream team. Also
Oh,
a
let's go.
fellow Arrow Ace Spec individual herself.
Nice.
We chatted with Ghost Girl about demisexuality. It was a great chat in episode 6. And it'll be exciting to have another discussion on Sunday during the Fruities Masquerade Raid Train. So you don't have to wait long for more discussion of asexuality and romanticism.
Yeah.
Let's go on a raid.